whole damn.
There, so.
There goes 10 votes.
You lost, lose a damn phone, man. Your life is gold. What now?
You don't know who's doing it.
Twice.
I said donuts
You know,
plural.
and you saw I did make a comment about our healthy food policy because that didn't meet it, but, you know.
You made that comment?
No, I said I did make a comment. I didn't, because they tried.
They had apple slices for lunch.
Oh, okay.
It did. And grilled chicken.
With or
Next to
without.
fried chicken.
With or without crispy on it.
All right. Take them off here. Prayers for Ed and his family. Teresa, you ready?
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. Mr. Rickman,
Here?
Mr. McDowell, Mr. Duval.
Yeah.
Mr. Bond,
Here.
Mr. Davis.
Here. Let's everyone keep Mr. McDowell's family in your prayers. He's tending to his father's needs right now. Mr. Duval, you care to lead us in prayer?
I'll do that. Gracious God, you are the creator of the universe. You are creator of the sparrow. Keep all of us in your loving hands, and remember especially the horror that we have experienced in Las Vegas. Remember the families of the victims. Remember the families of those that are fighting for their life. And also, we thank you for our first responders who helped train us this morning and helped rescue the people yesterday in Las Vegas. Help us to understand their needs as we sit around this council table and talk about the needs of this city. Give us the wisdom to discern what we should do to reach all of our goals. For we ask in Christ's name, amen.
Amen.
Is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, if you could, make a few adjustments, at least for the
Amendments here.
executive session, we can help y'all
Motion
walk
to,
through.
is there a motion to adopt the agenda, add discussion of healthcare? Just kind of dictate what we want the product to look like. I would suggest that a focus ought to be on brownfield sites and not greenfield sites. Not brownfield in terms of environmental status, but places that could use some adaptive reuse. Old car dealerships that sit barren, old shopping centers that are on the bus lines, on major thoroughfares, not far from our existing schools and parks and the like, but an opportunity to bring new life with some density to places that on existing commercial corridors. And just a thought I just kind of want to put on the table and talk about ways in which we can we have a need, we have the benefit of not yet, although we're seeing rents rise rather precipitously in the city, and we want to see rents rise for our commercial owners, but at the very same time we got to make sure our city remains affordable and is indeed a city for all people. How can we move this ball downfield? And just want to at least make sure we had a chance to discuss it a little more openly and develop at least some degree of consensus, and then spend some time with the county and see if we can also get some of their tools in the toolbox and just put something on the table and see if the market responds.
Density is, something that we can trade off. I remember years ago we went to see the Crosland products in Charlotte, and what was so great about when we went, you remember we went on that bus trip, and what you saw is that all the units were exactly the same, but they got higher density, so they were allowed to create more. I don't want to use the word rent control, but it made it a more affordable unit, and you didn't know who had what. The fabric was greatly, I know that there's a lot of discussion around what was done with the student housing, but, I think one of the things there would be is how do we craft that to work better if you did something like that, so that if somebody did flip it, that maybe there's a portion of that money that would come back into a fund to grow some more housing. Use that as a way to a little clawback, but instead of it being a clawback for tax purposes, it actually furthers development on. I think there's probably a bunch of unique ways that we could encourage. I do think that as part of the discussion, we have to talk about senior housing as part of that too.
Absolutely. And I think it's important. I mentioned workforce housing. This runs the gamut. I mean, I think depending on how creative people want to be, we should be talking about 30% AMI all the way up to 120% AMI, and we should be talking about not just young professionals and folks who are at the peaks of their careers, but certainly seniors all the way up the spectrum.
And I think the shopping center, we talked about that. Maybe it was you and I, or the three of us, maybe when we were in Washington one time at NLC, one community required all big boxes. So like
Yeah.
Walmarts and stuff, to have that structure was built in that it could be easily converted into housing. And it was how they constructed the building so that it could then be converted. And Walmart did several of them, I remember, but, maybe something to look into. Give some incentive.
I think, well, I don't, I think that, the conversation is timely. We bounced it around, and up to this point, everybody has stated their thoughts on it. I would like to see us do two things. And I agree that, but I think you're finding now too, when you read some of these articles, that young professionals don't have a problem living around elderly folks in inner city.
We're pretty nice people.
Right, I know. So there's an opportunity. I think we should continue to look at opportunities to have a mix, number one. And that, I'd like to see developers, if they come in and make the pitch, that the product has to be tied into our economic development plans, even if you're looking at certain parts of the city. It has to meet our needs also, and what we plan if we're going to jumpstart areas that need an economic boost. And also, I think we could look at some models because they range in size. I still like the model that Deborah sort of put together off Water Street. It's smaller, it's ours, but that was more accepting also in that area. There's some folks that had some issues with it, but it's small scale.
I think that's better.
Well, not in all cases, but I'm just saying when there are opportunities to do that, we ought to do it.
Please, Mr. Duval.
A couple of things, Mayor. I think that we need to look at inclusionary zoning at the same time and maybe put it in our zone for all areas of the city. Maybe not as many units, but a certain percentage of them, maybe 5% of units being built have to be available. Mm-hmm. And then, second part of that is, you remember Harry Miley and others at our Chamber of Commerce Committee thought about targeted areas that you would piggyback on, like the old car dealerships, the old malls, strip malls and all. We could target with the agreement of the two school districts and the county to share the taxes off of.
That's a good point. That we were talking with Harry and great meetings at the chamber. Had Richland 1 and Richland 2 there. The thought again, thinking of adaptive reuse, existing infrastructure, but spending some time in a really thoughtful process of where there are existing school buildings, where there are existing parks, where the Comet currently runs or could easily service, and as a result, it becomes a collective decision. And as we look at millage prospectively, if we were to sacrifice some millage or other incentives, it would also be a collective contribution from our respective entities. Of course, we all know the school district is about over 60% of all tax dollars collected as well.
The last thing I agree with Sam. I think smaller scale. I think 200 units might be. We're tearing down Gonzales, and I think the consensus now is you don't want to put a large concentration in one place, and the scatter them out around the city, I think, would be more acceptable.
I think there's an opportunity, Sorry?
No, and let me say this, when I say 200, we're talking about maybe a third of them being
Small
affordable.
percentage.
Yeah, the other two-thirds being market rate, which seems to be pretty healthy.
Because, you know, the model works, mixed income, mixed use, is more accepting. I remember we had arguments like that when I was going around the state, intercepting units in HUD projects for people with disabilities. Nobody knows what you have in your refrigerator unless they come in and open it. Okay? That was my philosophy. So you don't know what your neighbor, what they're all about, what's in their bank account, as long as everybody abide by the rules and live according to their means and enjoy the amenities that come with living together, you know. And it worked.
Just a couple comments. I mean, I think certainly, y'all know how I feel. I think this is long overdue, and I definitely support this and being creative and getting it done. I think where there's a smaller footprint of land, small projects will work, but I also think that we've got to keep in mind, y'all, what the need is. And if we're really going to take control of this and really address a need in our community and provide the number of housing that we need to be open to both. I think that larger complexes that are mixed use are good. Smaller, independent throughout the community is good as well. But I think we can't box ourselves into just doing small developments. The other thing I guess I would say, twofold. Number one, I think that as we get out there, we know what usually happens when we have these discussions, and we've talked about this before. I think that we really need to commit to advocating for what is needed and working to educate our citizenry as to why it's needed and what it really means. I've seen this council, just to be frank and honest, back down when people say, I don't want it in my neighborhood and I don't like it, and we're hurting ourselves and we're hurting our citizens. One of the things that most of the folks I find that end up coming and say they don't like it, when they actually understand what it is, not only would it work in their neighborhood, but quite honestly, a lot of them would even qualify for it because people don't know the numbers. But I think that it's imperative that we control the narrative on it and that we make sure that we don't get ourselves in a situation where we're allowing people's stereotypes or misinformation to derail something that we know is needed in our community, because we've got more and more families that are homeless. St. Lawrence Place has just bought the family shelter, and they can't even provide what they need. And so we've got to address this head on, and in order to do it, we've got to be the leaders in this, and we can't back down to people disagreeing with with the way we're trying to go.
And I think getting away from the perception, because a lot of the things that we've seen in the past have been 100%, housing tax credits. It didn't matter if it was senior or what, people just have this perception, and I think this mixed use approach is much better and it's more sustainable. I think the other piece is that, if we do a comprehensive plan is, odd lots and other things, there's a huge population that's going to the teeny house. We laugh about it, but it's really growing in other communities, and they're able to put these things in odd places that we normally would have not zoned or allowed to be built, but they work and they fill a need. And so I think as we look at this, let's look at a comprehensive plan and try to take advantage of the uniqueness that's out there.
If we can do something that unleashes the private sector, let the private sector do what it does and meet a public need at the same time, it empowers people like Lila Anna and others, who've been working to do good work, but gives them an extra tool in their toolbox that allows them to build more than back their play when we deal with some of the NIMBY issues. And also don't want to leave off that our independent arm's length CDCs also have several lots in their inventory as well, and finding ways to maybe get those on the market in some ways in which we can facilitate that type of construction, maybe get some cash back on their balance sheets as well, versus the assets, and be able to redeploy it. But, I don't know if Gloria say something or not, but we need to do something, and something meaningful, and something now. And I think,
Can we give the tools to the private sector? They'll, I mean, there's a market need, so if we give them the tools to do it, they'll take care of it.
yeah, I mean, so, but I think having that flexibility that Sam and Howard mentioned too, it might be a large parcel of land, old car dealership that's ripe for something meaningful and significant. And just a few blocks away or across town, there might be a small parcel of land for small development. But if you get 6 or 7 of those, I mean, we're putting a dent in it. And I think we got to go ahead and empower folks to get some things done. Let's enable them, and let's kind of get out of the way and see how things go.
Why don't we get Rebecca and the home
Oh,
builders
yeah,
involved, and let's talk about what they envision, what they see in the marketplace, look at what abilities, but also as we're developing policies or procedures that they're involved, so that, we're all moving the ball forward together.
I want to share a conversation with you all too.
We have had at the Municipal Association, the National Development Council, come in and make presentations, and I think they've worked with the city.
They've done great work.
That's an organization we need to get involved in this.
Gloria's back there probably shaking her head. She's a
Oh,
big believer in
They did great
NDC.
work. I'm going to speak to them next month, as a matter of fact. They did great work.
In Washington? Yeah.
They're going to speak there next month.
Well, some of our staff is going to that.
Okay, I'll be there. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, but
In some of the discussions, and if you guys have ever kind of watched the way that the 9% tax credit works, it's a really good program, and it's a profitable program. And the question I asked some of our really talented 9% developers, some who are based in the state and some who are not, but who participate in the process of state housing each year, is what could we do to using local incentives to try and make a deal look a lot more like a 9% deal in terms of the way the cash flows, and make it attractive. And, the 9% deals a tax credit program, 4% deals is a bond program, and this is back of the envelope. And I'm glad Jeff Palin's not here. Get on me, but
Is he still moving?
No, he's at GFOA.
the GFLA this week. But understanding that we had was that would look like about $10,000 in incentive per unit would allow something to cash flow. That's over the life of the project, not 1 year. So you think about it. If you got a 200, let's say 20 unit product, you're talking about $200,000 worth of incentives that would make it cash flow. Most of these 9% deals are about 50-something units, 58 units or so. It's kind of the strike point. So $580,000, which could be dirt, could be deferred taxes, could be any number of things. But just kind of thinking like that, it's not a lot of money based on some things we looked at in the past. So
It could make a significant difference.
it makes a huge difference. So I think you get things moving, and I think we just need to sit down, spend some time with the private sector, see what the interest levels there, spend some time with the county and others. Let's just come up with some tools, and let's put them out there and get out of the way. Spend some time with the neighborhoods and others. And I will say this too: one thing that has changed dramatically in the last 7 years is the quality of the product that we put out there.
Yeah.
I mean, we're finding some really, really nice homes being built.
two things on that point. One, I recall, and that was one of the problems we had in the disabilities community of the old Section 203 houses. You can tell a HUD product because they look like a HUD product in terms of quality and design and that sort of thing. But what I would like to see us do, if we're looking at mixed use, you got the residential and commercial. It's always been easier to do incentives for the residentials, but I still think if we're going to be looking at areas for development, areas targeted for development. And you're looking at a mixed-use development, I'd like to see some kind of incentives in there for the commercial folks. And that's difficult to do, but we provide abatements on taxes for
To go along with the
residential folks.
housing, or?
Yeah, well, because I think it makes it a lot easier to attract the commercial portion too. Because I think you want to be just as particular about commercial development, in other words, the product for that community and that area that you bring in, you want to help develop. You want to have you want quality there, just like you want in the housing part of it. So, and, Steve Gant wasn't too particular about tax abatements for about 2 or 3 years, but you got to do something.
I think there's creative ways, we
Right.
just need to look at it.
We need to do that. I think it helps, because in some areas, sometimes you get the residential, but the commercial comes slow. You can't get them at all.
Sometimes expedited service means more to somebody than a tax abatement.
Well, that's right. But whatever it takes, and, give them a break on water.
Well, and I was gonna say that too, because, and I think it's gotten a little bit better, but, I've talked to a couple, affordable housing developers who quite honestly said, because of the way some of the last couple projects have gone, they don't wanna do anything
Right.
in the city. And so that's why I said, we have to take a leadership role and be an advocate, because you're gonna get developers who, even if we make something attractive, they're not gonna want the headache if they feel like they're out there, to be paraded in front of the neighborhoods and be, demoralized because they wanna provide something good for our citizens.
Well, I think we started a team, and Gloria, I'm not sure, when prior to Gloria assuming her role, there was a team of us. I was just reminding Missy, with Deborah, and Ryan, and Krista, and myself meeting on this subject, trying to come up with some recommendations for incentives, because obviously incentives can mean some of the things you all are throwing around. It sometimes is going to mean some cash in the deal, and where does that funding come from? So we were thinking of, which I don't know that we can run the numbers again, but I know Ryan and Krista and all of us were talking about some of the student housing projects that have now come online, and if there's any way to capture something from the benefit of us having done that, and put it into some type of pot that can propel some of these ideas that you all are having as far as true incentives for developers to do affordable housing. So we need to dust that off and meet with folks like the home builders and others who can tell us what are the things that really would make a difference. Is it the, regulatory things, strengthening that, but also expediting? Or are there some things that developers need in their hands to get a project moving, obviously, from a funding perspective, gap funding, financing? I think we just need to kind of create that smorgasbord of things and bring it back to you to look at.
We place a target to have a product or a list or what have you by the end of the year. We can roll out beginning of the year.
I think we can have something
And
to
we
look
can,
at.
we can work on the intergovernmental side as well, but at least from our perspective.
If you do inclusionary zoning, usually one of the components of it would be the ability of a developer to pay into a bank, inclusionary bank, instead of putting the units in their development, they would pay, so that
That would be
might give
good.
us.
We need to find out. I know, Gloria, when we heard you
Thing
bring
that-
that up, I don't know if it's allowed yet in South Carolina to work in
Yeah,
that
I was
way.
gonna say, I thought we
think
had talked about it before, and I thought we didn't have the ability under state legislation,
To do what?
inclusionary zoning.
I don't know why not.
I think there's some limitations or some state law that was proposed this past year. I don't know that it passed. Are you familiar with that? Sure. That'd be cool.
I'm not familiar with anything that would prevent us.
I know we've talked about it 2 or 3 times. It actually was a recommendation from our Affordable Housing Task Force several years ago. And then that was one of the things that Brian Husky was supposedly working on with NHTF, but I didn't think we had the ability yet, but I could be wrong.
For the purpose of those listening in, explain exclusionary.
Inclusionary zoning means that if you build X number of units, you have to have a certain percentage of those available for affordable housing.
And then, like Howard was saying, or if they don't want to, then there would be a fee, a fee assessed that could be placed
A
into.
mitigation.
Yeah, mitigation
Oh, yeah,
fee. That could be
it's kind of like the handicap
placed
aside.
into,
It guarantees so many units
Right.
for people with disabilities.
Gloria.
I was just going to say that earlier just this year, the state legislature, I believe it was Senator Kempson, presented a bill on inclusionary zoning, although it didn't pass.
This year?
Yes, it didn't pass, so.
But there's no prohibition for a city putting that into the ordinance. Charleston has it.
No, that I don't know. I can't answer into that in terms of the city being able to do it, but I do know on the state level that was presented.
And I thought the way the legislation we can get any number of folks to clarify all this for us and do some research, but I thought it had to pass before it freed up municipalities to do certain things more openly. But I could be wrong. If Charleston's doing it, we just need to look at what they're doing. There's some caveat, I know, with this legislation and how it would impact municipalities, but I don't remember exactly the details.
We can certainly look into that.
Okay.
That's what you have us do.
Yeah, thank you.
I remember Charleston has something that helps fund their housing trust fund. But other than that, I wasn't aware that they had something different. All right, but thank you, Mr. Mayor, for continuing to bring this forward. I think we need to move on this and just really make some decisions and do some stuff.
12:31.
So wait, can I say that Ms. Said and I had a fabulous time last week at the National League of Cities Financial Inclusion Summit, and we got lots of ideas. So y'all just be prepared.
I'm really glad she was with you.
Yeah, she kind of could tell me down, like, well, but it was. We'll be bringing some things forward, but we had a fabulous time, and I think we got some information that could help supplement and support some of the things that we're already doing.
Right. Well, that wraps up our work session items, Mr. Mayor.
All right. You got some executive session items?
Yes, sir.
I would move, we would go into executive session for receipt of legal advice relating to a pending, threatened, or potential claim pursuant to 30-4/70A2, Lolita Earl Sumter versus City, and Eula Brown versus City. Discussion of matters relating to proposed location expansion services to encourage location or expansion of industries or other businesses pursuant to SC Code 3470A2, parking agreements and incentive criteria, and discussions of negotiations incident to proposed contractual arrangements pursuant to 3470A2, home serve, and discussion of negotiations incident to proposed contractual arrangements pursuant to 3470A2, healthcare procurement.
Second.
Moving second, in discussion? Seeing none, we'll move to the previous question. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Rickman. Mr. Duval.
Aye.
Ms. Brown. Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mayor Lambert.
Aye. It got cold in here. Temperature dropped. It got cooler in here.
I'm always cold.
You've been through the fire. Hey, buddy.